us probably a regional and almost global feel of how SMEs in Asia and South Asia were affected or are still being affected by COVID-19. I'd like to ask Mr. Ashutosh to give us the effects that he has felt in his sector, particularly for the MSMEs. Mr. Ashutosh?
Thank you, Pacita. Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible. Perfect. So thanks for this. And I think this is an important aspect to be discussing today. I mean, small businesses, as Amit said prior to this, serve as the foundation of our economy and the pillars of our communities across the world. Globally, they represent, I think, so around 90% of business, with nearly 50 to 60% workers globally, delivering half of the GDP. Even if I look at India specifically, Pacita, we have nearly 63 million small and medium enterprises, which employ 114 million people in India, and they contribute to nearly 35% of the GDP. Right. So that's the enormity as far as the MSME concept is concerned, and hence anything that happens to MSMEs is obviously going to impact the economy. It's going to impact the social fabric of a nation. So that's why it's very important to see what can we do to get them out of this COVID issue. So, but if we step back and look at what has happened, there's also a need to understand what was the situation of the MSMEs. So MSMEs have typically had limited access to credit. They've had age-old inefficient methods of operating the business because they're very small organizations. They've adopted technology in a very small way. Their access to markets and supply chains have always plagued their growth for decades. That's been a given, right? And because of the dependence on cash economy and supply chain disruptions have made these small businesses actually become the hardest hits. In India, for example, according to certain reports, only 5 million SMEs, which is roughly 10% of our MSMEs, were able to operate during the lockdowns in India, right? And we also have another report which says that nearly 73% of these MSMEs have reported a decline in orders, and 50% have seen an increase in the inventory levels, but demand erosion and supply chain disruptions. So all of this obviously contributes to a lot of stress in the system. And because a large number of these SMEs are unbanked or operate outside the realm of what you would call the formal economy, making distribution of monetary benefits and access to capital is also a challenge for them. So what we actually have now seen in COVID is a very peculiar disintermediation of these SMEs, right? Which is interesting because it also shows us a silver lining. So with the alterations that the pandemic has brought along, we've seen consumers across the globe rapidly going digital. And all of us, you and I, everyone has actually gone digital, from purchasing our groceries to watching movies, paying our utility bills.
That's right.
Our habits have changed. And with these changes, we've seen that those changes are more or less going to be permanent to a large extent. I mean, we did a study in MasterCard, and we found that 49% of Indian consumers are planning to make more purchases online. And at the same time, 60% of them think that this online shopping is going to be here to stay. So digital was a lifesaver for all of us in the COVID. Those MSMEs who could not match up to the digital actually got disintermediated. So what we have is a very peculiar situation where, because of COVID, MSMEs were going out of business, but some MSMEs figured out a way to address that problem. And thus, the three key challenges that we see going forward for MSMEs, and I'm not restricting this just to the COVID scenario, three challenges that you really look at from an MSME perspective historically and going forward is MSMEs need to get paid in time for what services they deliver or products they deliver. They need to get credit to be able to run their business. And the third is they need to have access to newer consumers, markets, and supply chains. And if you look at all of these three imperatives for MSMEs, going digital is going to be key. And that's where FinTechs can help in all of these areas. So when, so to the point, what can private sector do for this? right? I really see private sector coming in various ways to enable them to get digital and financial literacy, because as we were discussing also a little earlier, one of the biggest hindrances to going digital is the ability for MSMEs to understand how to go digital and the processes that they need to follow and the benefits of going digital and financial literacy. In fact, Cisco made a study, which in India specifically, where it found that if SMEs digitized, they could add up to nearly 150 to 200 billion dollars to India's GDP by 2024. And if you replicate this across South Asia or across the world, you can imagine the amount of contribution to the business. The first part is enable them by giving them digital and financial literacy. The second is empowering them with tools to accept digital payments, driving secure processes, to get access to newer markets. And the third is to help them enhance their business by not just getting access to international markets and other markets, but also to build supply chains resilience, etc. So I would look at these 3x3 metrics: getting paid, getting credit, getting access, going digital by empowering them, enhancing their operations, and then empowering their operations and then enhancing their operations. And I'll just stop here because I'm sure there are others who'd like to.
Thank you, Ashutosh. That was a great introduction to somebody who represents an institution or a bank who saw that silver lining, who was, really, I might say, a newcomer for a lot in the digital space. But I think they saw something even before COVID. And that's why I know that Mr. Jaypee Solimon from our very own UnionBank in the Philippines has something to say about how they're now using FinTech to actually attract a lot of a sector, the millennials who are startups and millennials who are MSMEs. JP, would you like to tell us something about how UnionBank just rode on this trend?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Ashutosh has already said a lot already about how fintechs really play a game in terms of the bringing back the SMEs glory, as we might call it from before, right? But there's one challenge that I would like to share with everyone. I think, Ashutosh, you might want to agree with this also. Aside from those knowledge gaps and everything, the ability to pay for the technology is a very, very big challenge for these SMEs. There are a lot of these systems, software, technologies available for them. But right here in the Philippines, what we've noticed is that even if 95, I think there was a study that was made, 95% of business owners are saying, we want and we need to go digital. But only 30% of them proceed to going digital. And why is that? It's the cost to go digital. That's what's stopping them. In fact, a lot of them are even saying that, it's easy to manage the knowledge gap. It's easy to learn. It's easy to and they're even willing to hire people who will manage those technologies for them. But again, to access that technology, that's the problem. That's where we come in. That's one of the silver linings that we saw. As a bank who specializes in technology, we're going to be greedy about this tech. Right? Why don't we share this tech to our customers, our ecosystems, maybe from a supply chain perspective or a community perspective, and allow them to be able to get access to those technologies in an affordable way, right? So that's where we started building our own digital platforms, like one partnership we have, which is the UnionBank Global Linker. We have a fintech company that we own, UBX, who's building technologies around the customer journey and the actual requirements of business owners and SMEs. And through that, we're able to bring them to that digital space. And I'd be happy to share that, in fact, during the pandemic alone, we can roughly say that we were able to digitize around close to 120,000 SMEs. And that's one way for us to really help them. And to do that, we even gave out platforms for free. No charges, no subscription fees, just for them to be able to get that feel and get into the digital space. And then later on, as we are seeing the different needs and requirements of the business, that's where we start putting together partner fintechs, right? So we know we cannot build everything ourselves. MasterCard is a very big partner of ours. MAS has been a very big partner also of UnionBank, right? So we bring in the fintech partners these technologies that before the SME could not even see, they couldn't even find. We package them, we pre-negotiate the rates for them for the SMEs, and we present them in a silver platter for the SMEs to consume. That way, again, we can deepen the relationship and we can deepen that digital transformation journey for them. Unfortunately, there is still one barrier, still one major barrier. It's culture. Up until the time that the local culture really spells out digital, like what you mentioned earlier, Pacita, when you said the millennials, right? The millennials are there.
Mm-hmm.
But fortunately, even the digital migrants, the baby boomers, the Gen X, they're slowly onboarding. Once we break that culture of fear of change, fear of going digital, because we've already made it very accessible and very affordable, then we'll really see a good transformation in the SME space in the Philippines. When that happens, I hope that the time comes when what Ashutosh was saying, how many billions of dollars can be contributed to the economy, to the GDP because of digitization. We really hope to be the enabler of that for the local economy.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for giving that local picture, JP. And of course, they call themselves now technology companies, not banks or a credit card company. I got that from Ashutosh and JP a while ago. So Eugene is now going to share with us what public sector or what government can actually do in terms of policy to actually enable the enablers and to make it like a nice playing everyone. Is Eugene here?
Yes.
Yeah, Eugene.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
tell us
Pacita,
about what
and,
you're doing in MAS. Yeah.
Yes, and hello from Singapore. So as you know, we are a small country, but we're always looking towards the world, looking towards globalization. And I think when we looked at the COVID crisis, how it impacted SMEs, and in fact SMEs around the world, we took a very holistic view of the whole situation. Before we go even to the impact of SMEs and what steps governments are taking, let's take a step back and as I think Ashutosh noted, what are the challenges that SMEs face now, right? And they're quite stark. Everyone knows substantial percentage of all, in fact 99% in Singapore of all businesses are SMEs, over 50% of GDP. More so I think in other countries. But the challenges are lots of time structural. I think what Ashutosh noted, and more so I think highlighted by in World Bank, in fast-growing economies, 15% of SMEs only get the access to the credit that they need. And that's a major stumbling block, because if they want to go, they have great ideas, they can't get the financing that they need, right? And this financing gap is, even before COVID, was substantial. IFC noted that there's this huge gap in financing, is $5.2 trillion US dollars annually. But even more so with COVID, this has expanded substantially. How banks, how financial institutions look at financing, look at helping SMEs grow, that itself is a structural problem, because traditionally, as any SME knows, if you want financing, you go to the bank. First thing they ask you is, where's your audited financial statements, right? If you don't have that, that's a challenge. Secondly, where's your 5 years? Where's your 5-year plans? And for a lot of startups, even fintechs are coming up. They're looking to survive for the next year. So, they assess you on 5-year plans, they assess you on audited financial statements, they assess you on tax returns, and just traditional data sources, which SMEs need to get the financing, SMEs need to get the financial services they need, doesn't really fit them, the traditional banking model. So where we at MAS, we took look at a structural change, and we work the rest of the government. We talk to a lot of industry people, MasterCard, we talk with UBP and UBX, how can we change the game? Because we're at the start of a new century, 2020. Not a great start for the year. I think everyone can admit that. But it's still a start to an entire new decade. And in fact, although COVID has exacerbated a lot of the problems that SME face, and in India, I think what we noted, 90% of startups had revenue losses, 40% closed down just in the first 6 months this year. But it's still an opportunity because inevitably all SMEs need to go into the digital economy, right? They need to transform, they're forced to transform themselves to survive. And I think that's the challenge that in MES we are trying to facilitate too. And adding to the point that Ashutosh noted, the three needs that the SME needs for getting paid, getting financing, getting the digital services. And the point that Jaypee noted, right? How do you make it easier for SMEs to adopt digitalization? How do you change mindsets? The first thing that MES did was, is there a way that we can drive a structural global initiative to bring all these needs that an SME wants at a single contact point, right? So how do you make it, like as Jaypee noted, if you go to someone, whether in a city or whether in a village, how do you convince them to go digital? The issue isn't here are a range of digital solutions. Try to figure out yourself what you need. And then when you're ready, we'll come and get you, right? It should be as simple as how businesses are now using Facebook, businesses are now using Instagram. It's so intuitive. You don't have to teach them to use it. But through that platform, they can reach the rest of the world. And so at MES, we started this initiative called Business Sans Borders, which we've just operationalized to a new entity called Proxterra now. And the aim is how do we get all these different ecosystems around the world connected, right? So that when the SME, whether he's on Jaypee's UB Global Linker platform or UBX platform, or whether they're on the any of the MasterCard platform, through their existing platform, they can connect to the rest of the world. They can get new buyers, new suppliers, because business residency has been hit during the COVID scenario, right? Supply chains have been disrupted. So can they find new connections digitally, right? So that's the first step we've tried to resolve. The second aspect we tried to resolve was how can they get, even after they find a buyer and seller, how can they get all the key financial services, the key business services that they need? And that's where it's a holistic partnership. So we are talking to people like MasterCard, definitely UBP and UBX. How can banks around the world, how can FinTechs around the world be all connected through all these different ecosystems so that from an SME perspective, it's a one-to-many relationship.
So,
and so that's why we tried to operationalize it. We've launched it at FinTech Festival. It's called Proxterra. We started out linking with 6 platforms across 4 countries. We hope we can expand further. But the simple narrative is this: if an SME sitting on its existing platform, let's say a Jaypee's platform, is able to connect to Proxterra or Business Sans Borders, they can, through the existing platform, so they don't need to change their behavior, they can find other buyers and suppliers overseas. And once they find that, with that information, with that alternative information, with the transactional layer, with the knowledge of the buyer, they can get financing. And that's where FinTechs come in. That's where forward-looking banks can come in, because it's data-driven type of financing. And on top of that, they can get payments, because not all SMEs on electronic payments, right? Some are still very traditional. They might be on letters of credit and whatnot, or TTs. And that's where I think MasterCard have their own credit program, which helps SMEs go digital in terms of corporate payments. And that's very important, right? Because that breeds trust, because the international name comes in. And so at their doorstep, they get new buyers, they get financing, they get payments. And then if there's logistics providers, they get that too, because that helps to complete their whole value chain. And they can focus on their core business, which is how do they grow, how do they survive, and how do they adapt and transform in this current COVID crisis. Because that's what we need to help SMEs to do, to focus on their core competency, while we as government, while we as work with banks and FinTechs, make their lives easier. I'll just take a quick pause there because I've been quite of a monologue. Yeah.
Anyway, it's okay. I think it all connects, and so now we go back to Ashutosh, which covers, a very big population, on how governments in South Asia are helping private sector do something that Eugene's doing in Singapore, for example. Ashutosh?
Yeah, so I think they're doing quite a few things, some of them which are very similar to what Eugene was talking about, right? So, at one end, we started with some of the similar, and let me take the issue of getting access to credit, which Eugene was talking about, which Pacita tries to address, right? Traditionally in India, or in South Asia, we also had these concepts of providing credit through the traditional bank financing institutions. The uptake of those credit abilities were not there. So especially fundamentally because for the same reason which I stated and Eugene also talked about, most of our MSMEs don't have a credit history, right? Mm-hmm. Most of them don't have a credit history. Many of them are actually very small proprietorship shops, etc. So they're really, what I would say, they really are under the radar as far as the traditional financing process or credit worthiness process is concerned, right? There's another problem also, which we need to understand in MSMEs, and Eugene threw a very huge figure of what the credit gap is in trillions. In India, if I really look at it, the credit gap is just in India is around $34 billion, which has also obviously gone up for MSMEs. But there are some other problems which are there also. A majority of our MSMEs are also in the hinterlands, in the rural areas. And traditional banks don't have an outreach over there. Right? So there is a problem. And I'll come to what the government is doing and what the private sector is doing to actually address these sort of things. The second other problem is traditional banking credit processes require a lot of human intervention. Right? Because that's the way it was. People used to go to the bank to get loans. Right? Whereas now MSMEs are distributed in different places. And because if you follow the same process, you're actually slowing down the process. Right? And the third, obviously, is what I talked about. Most of the MSMEs don't have a formal credit history. So you have three different issues. Access, because a lot of MSMEs are in rural areas where you don't have formal bank branches or outreaches. There are processes which are outdated, archaic, or which require human intervention and can't speed it up. So what the government has started doing in India, for example, they created this concept of banking correspondents. So who are basically, if I use an example, they are people who can link up with the bank, can be the connector between a bank and a rural MSME or a rural citizen or whoever it is. So they go and do banking at your doorstep. So what has happened is that the government has actually enabled the regulation for these things to happen. You can also have ATM at the end process. That's one part of it. The second part of it is, can we start looking at alternative data gathering for financing, right? So can we start accepting things like supply chain finance? And for supply chain finances, can we start looking at, easing credit ratios and all of that stuff, internal ratings by the financial institutions. So these are those areas which, the banks can actually start working in. And of course, then when you start looking at, the aspect of, most of these people being in rural areas, right? How do you make them accept technology easily? Then you have to start looking at areas where you make the process simpler, which comes to the point which Jaypee talked about, right? Can we make the process so simple? So can you start making POS machines which are actually on your phones instead of having you to buy a device worth $100, $150 and maintaining it? Can you start creating solutions which enable you to maintain your daily transactions on your phone itself, as compared to a large debit and credit account which an enterprise would do? So I think these are the type of innovations and the acceptances which the government can drive to a large extent to help this further. And I'll stop at this stage. You are muted, or your connection, Pacita, we can't hear you.
I think we lost Pacita. Hello? There.
Oh, she's good.
Yeah. But
Jaypee, I think, I mean, you know, to that point, from a banking perspective, right? And given, you know, your vantage point in Philippines, because you have very similar topography of, you know, MSMEs in rural areas, etc. As a bank, how have you looked at these challenges? The things which Eugene talked about, in which Pacita. Sorry, Pacita, I stepped in.
Yeah. Actually, I was going to add on what you were saying earlier.
Ashutosh, go ahead, please.
The Philippines, we're not really a large land mass, but we are an archipelago and really, really separated by a lot of seas and waters, right? And the biggest challenge for any traditional bank, well, if you think the old ways, the biggest challenge is you need money so you can build more branches, right? But in reality, there's one key thing that people should have done, and I feel that we are doing very well right now. It's partnerships, right? Partnerships. Imagine us, UnionBank, as a local bank, we only have roughly around 200 to 210 branches in the country, but we are able to serve customers with 50,000 counters. That's because of partnerships, and not counting counters or the digital channels where the fintechs would normally come in. Now, from the mindset of traditional banking, where okay, here is a business owner, here's an SME, he needs financing, he needs some credit, and of course the bank will ask for, again, 2 years financial statement, and you're lucky if we only ask for 2. Sometimes we will ask for 5. Sometimes we will ask for collateral, which the person is only renting his house. How could he post collateral and things like that, right? But through partnerships, the invisible data becomes visible to us, because we know for a fact that this business owner has their own customers, but we could not see the transactions with the customer. An SME who is playing in a grander supply chain with a principal account, maybe an FMCG or a larger cement company, and they have a relationship for the past 3 years already, that data that was invisible to us before, through partnerships, becomes visible and becomes the basis of credit scoring. The same way like e-commerce is happening right now, right? A lot of traditional banks will not allow e-commerce sales data to be used for credit. But looking at it differently, layering data analytics, layering data science, and having a good partnership with platforms as well, gives us trust to that data and visibility to that data. Therefore, now we can extend lending. Now, again, I might have been mixing things, no? I might have been mixing data, perspective, visibility. But how about the actual reaching out and getting close to the customer? Having 7,300 islands in the country, and that's only during low tide. You have to, there's a different number if it's high tide and things like that, right? But and that's where community partnerships comes in, right? So granted, for example, there's a far-flung area, a far-flung province that is reachable only by sea, and by land it will take you 16-20 hours just to get there. A traditional bank will never spend time to do it, right? But a community partner, a non-profit organization, a cooperative who's already there, once we set up a partnership with them, they can already vouch that person for us. And that's one way. When you layer in technology to that partnership, brings so much into the table and brings so much of extending services to the customer, extending financing to the customer, and helping them grow in their own small way.
Yeah, I just want to add to Jaypee's, I think, really good point on how partnerships, I think, are so important for fintechs, for financial institutions, especially to build up alternative data to build up more reactive financing to help the SMEs. And I'll come from two angles. One is a bottom-up perspective, and one is a top-down perspective. I think from a bottom-up perspective, there needs to be closer cooperation between just the vast amounts of information that each bank has, but it's all separate silos. And fintechs who are really doing the hard work, I think we have to take our hats off to them to reach out to all the multitude of, India has 50 million SMEs and MSMEs. It's a challenge, I think, as Ashutosh noted, just for banks, traditional banking model, and the cost just to reach out to SMEs and MSMEs. But what we tried to kick off in Singapore, and it's a global initiative, is called the API Exchange, or APIX. And that's a platform where fintechs and banks can raise problem statements for each other. If a bank says, look, I need to reach out to my cohort in Jaypee's situation of SMEs spanning across multiple islands in Philippines, fintech could take up that problem statement as a challenge and say, look, I've come up with a solution. I want to prototype this with you rapidly. And so this could also be replicated in India, where a bank needs a solution to reach out to hundreds of farmers spread across a vast distance. And a fintech which comes out with a mobile-first solution, which is very intuitive in native language for farmers, for small shop owners to find financing, to find financial intelligence, could then team up with this bank to find solutions. So this APIX system, or API Exchange, is a global system. I think we welcome everyone to try out, to test it out. But just a quick way, because a lot of what we need, especially what exacerbated because of COVID, is very agile solutioning, agile prototyping, because the ground has shifted. There is becoming a new normal, I think. Some overused word of everyone. And the solutions that worked last year, it doesn't work this year anymore. The second aspect I wanted to highlight was just how governments play such a key important role at this very critical juncture. Because as both of the gentlemen here noted, to reimagine how financing is done, you need to share data sources. And one way is to, I won't say fully go to open banking, but transition more to open sharing of information. And what we've done in Singapore, we've created this thing called SG Findex, which is a digital identity. In Singapore, we have a national IC. I think in India, you have your own special identity for every citizen. To tie that special identity with all his financial information and pull it from all the different financial institutions into a single source. As long as the customer gives consent, he might have multiple accounts from different banks, but as long as customer gives consent, it's collated into a trusted government infrastructure, and then it's made available for access by fintechs, who make available. Of course, they are vetted, they're legitimate business, but available for fintechs to then create solutions, financial planning, financial empowerment. And I think we've started that in Singapore, but I think happy to work with any other country to see whether this can be propagated. And I think it's very beneficial, both for forward-looking banks, but also for payment solution providers or data analytics solution providers.
No, you made a very good point there, Eugene. I think this leveraging data, and there is something which is started in India also called the Open Credit Evaluation Network or something. They're working on that, a similar concept, right? Basically with the same fundamental, right? That at the end of the day, at the very basic level, it's the fintechs or those people on the street who can actually deliver solutions which are custom made for the type of people that you want to interact with, right? And if you don't have access to data, if you don't have the access or the ability to see that data and leverage it to create solutions, that's not going to happen. And in fact, last year, I think last year, the Reserve Bank also in India came out with something called a regulatory sandbox. And I think that's an equally important step that governments or regulators can take to create this, because finance and fintechs, the financial sector being such a critical infrastructure thing in every country, I presume it's nowhere where it's not critical infrastructure, right? You do need to give those walls available for people to be able to create solutions, test it, If they fail, then they can at least retest it, right? And at the same time, get access to data. I think that's a very important point that we take. I also had another thought, and Pacita, I'll hand it over to you after that. But it was sort of a
No, it's fine.
Coming out from.
Can you already see me?
Yes.
It's like I'm in one island that Jaypee found somewhere there. Oh my gosh! Like you said, Ashutosh, you have 3 providers. I have 3, and all of them seem to be orchestrating this non-connection. So I apologize, but please, I'm loving the discussion. It's just that you cannot see me. Well, not all the time.
Yeah.
Carry on.
So I was just thinking, that I was wondering, is there strength also in looking at aggregating demand, right? Because when for example, in India, we also have these clusters of MSMEs. You have a textile cluster somewhere else. You have an ancillary bike, cycle ancillaries in one cluster in one part of the country. And I'm sure it's there in every part of the world, right? Aggregating demand for credit, aggregating demand for, solutions like insurance and things of that sort. That could actually be another way to build, solutions. Because then what you're doing is, you are not talking about a singular individual MSME, but you're talking about a cluster of MSMEs, right? There is a structure which you can define, and maybe that's something can happen. You can create something. I don't know. I'd welcome your thoughts on this, Jaypee or Eugene or Pacita.
Well, in the Philippines, if I may add, for example, we have aggregated financing available for the agricultural sector. We even have financing just dedicated for women borrowers.
Yes.
Okay, because women have different needs, and it depends also on the policies. Like, can a woman borrow by herself without asking her spouse to sign off on the thing? So there are many things that we have started in the Philippines, and you can come up with innovations. And are you seeing me, gentlemen?
No.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
We can hear you.
You can hear me. Okay. Sumili will get mad at me. But anyway, okay. There you go. It's really difficult, but you can hear me. So we have clustered them by demand, as you said. But then what we need to do now is inject that FinTech, power into them, because this happens still in the traditional sector. And even if I ask farmers to write up an application, they wouldn't. So I think we have to jumpstart, as you said, from farmer to Facebook, or from farmer to something more intuitive. And so that's probably something we can share with the likes of Jaypee in the hyperlocal market, and then ask government to take inspiration from MA as wide as Ashutosh. And so maybe we should all put our different innovations together with FinTech as the common denominator.
So I wanted,
yes, please, Eugene.
I wanted to pick up on the point that the really good point that you made, Pacita, as well as Ashutosh, about aggregation. In MES, I think what we're seeing is a transition in traditional trade in traditional economies to a more platform type economies. And as Ashutosh noted, what is traditionally maybe a trade association for marine products, they are now starting to go on digital platforms too, especially more accelerated because of COVID. I mean, COVID has been a great chief technology officer for everyone. You must be digital now. So they're forcing all these traditional organizations to go digital, and it's a very interesting dynamic that we've noted, because it allows very traditional industries, they don't need to be digital, but because, as like Ashutosh noted, because they've aggregated together, they've worked with a common party they trust that has gone digital, they are now able to connect digitally. And from a country perspective, we're not just speaking from Singapore, but what we've noted, this is very beneficial because each country has its own unique products, has its own unique competitive advantages. And by different pockets of trade associations or communities going digital or forming digital platforms, that allows them to be discovered by the world, but also to reach out to the rest of the world. The challenge is how do you connect all these entities together? Because in the digital sense, to extend the example that Jaypee noted, there are now digital islands, thousands of digital islands around the world. Mm-hmm. Some are good in marine products, some are good in textiles, some are good in financing, but they're not able to find each other. So I think the challenge, and that's why, just to come back to the point again, in MES, we feel there needs to be a global initiative, which we're trying to kick off, to work with other countries, to work with other partners, to work with fintechs, to connect all these digital islands together. It benefits the SMEs directly because they can find potentially other buyers or suppliers quickly, but it also benefits fintech because the traditional route of fintech, after they've gone through their Series A and B and C funding, they still need to find a customer base, and usually they latch on to a bank to get financing, or usually they latch on to a big buyer to get financing. But if they're able to do a one-to-many connectivity to all these digital islands around the world, that allows them to drive their best-in-class solutions to whether they sit in Mumbai or Singapore or Kigali in Rwanda, they're able to drive their solutions because problems that SME face at the fundamental level are generally all quite the same.
Yes.
So I'll leave that thought there. But it's something we thought we're just seeing a structural shift now, and it's important to bring a meeting of minds to make that change.
So again, how can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Please, Jaypee. How do we fast track? And I'll ask you three gentlemen to give your suggestions on how to fast track the digital transformation of the MSME.
Wow, how to fast track the digital? Well, basically it boils down to the SME business owner themselves. Number one is acceptance. Well, I'm talking from the point of view of the business owner. Acceptance of the need and the time is now to go digital. That's first. And second is take out that fear that because I'm a small business, this is not for me or I cannot afford this. Because taking out that fear allows you to widen your view of where to look for and where to find the correct partners, right? But from our perspective, really the way to fast track this is to be able to really educate them. I'm not just saying like theoretical educating them, like having webinars left and right, talking about what payment solutions are there, what ERP are there, but it's really deeper into how do you apply the benefits of digitalization to your business and how does it really impact you and your community. Because so that's something that we've learned recently. Since the start of the pandemic, we've been doing a lot of this education series, webinars left and right. But what we really found to be effective is when we start to really talk about real life scenarios, not theories, not highfalutin sales pitches, but real life scenarios of how you can pivot your business to the digital space and how to do it step by step. To share, people thought that if I don't have an email address, I'm no longer going to be able to go digital. But the funny thing is, people are saying, I don't have an email address, but I have 3 Facebook pages. So how did you have 3 Facebook pages if you do not have one single email address, right? So you see, their language is different. Their understanding is different. For them, for me to be able to go digital, don't talk to me about an email address. But if I talk to them about maximizing a Facebook account to go digital and how to use that to go digital, I guess that's the way to really accelerate it. And from there, we go one step at a time, and you'll see a faster acceptance rate, faster onboarding rate from the customers because it's closer to their heart, it's closer to their experience, and that's how they want to experience it. right? That for me, that I believe is how we will accelerate.
Eugene?
So
So MES, I think we've always taken a global outlook. We always see it as a win-win to work with other countries, to work with private sector also. I think we're quite big on our big partnerships. First thing, I think we welcome any fintechs who are interested to grow. Everything is digital now, so you don't need to fly over to Singapore. you can stay where you are and connect with us. Our government has been very proactive, very supportive. There are quite a number of funding available to drive connectivity, to drive support for great ideas. The second part is we are big on partnerships. And for example, one of our initiatives, Business Sense Borders, which is commercializing with Boxterra, we've partnered with United Nations Development Programme, Global Center for Technology and Innovation. And their mission is to reach out to the 170 member countries around the world to drive better technology adoption by SMEs in specific areas. And one of them was agriculture areas, but could also extend to manufacturing and so forth. And they have a great program called Cultivate, where they are curating great fintech or great technology solutions, and then sharing this technology to SMEs which really need it, which I think Ashutosh noted. How do you make it very intuitive for SMEs to level up? And where fintechs can come in, and that's where we find it very interesting also, is how do you marry a fintech solution with like an agri-tech solution or urban tech solution? One example we saw was a fintech solution which married together agri-tech through satellite technology. So they use satellite technology to study crop patterns, and with this enhanced information on crop patterns, where Jaypee and Ashutosh was talking about alternative data, they gave banks better credit assessments, faster credit assessments to give out micro loans. Because the challenge for SMEs is always micro loans, right? Sub 50,000 US dollar loans, or even a few $1,000 loans. So that's one example, but there are a lot of these initiatives out there. I'm happy to share more beyond the time of this call, but we're partnering with UN, we're partnering with other countries. How can we all work together to make it easier for great ideas to reach out to SMEs, to help SMEs to also grow? So do reach out to us. I think we're very helpful on this.
Wow. And I want to go to Singapore.
We welcome you.
And Ashutosh?
Yeah. So I think we just have around 5 minutes left. So I actually call it the ABCD, right? Of how we can do this. And some of the points actually Jaypee mentioned in his earlier intervention. So in our opinion, I think so. It's affordability and accessibility, right? So that's the A, which leads to applicability, which basically is the MSME should be able to afford the technology. It should be accessible, and they should be able to see the benefit of that technology and how it will improve their lives, right? Whether that's in terms of getting better credit, whether that's in terms of getting better customers, whether that's in terms of customer loyalty or growing their customers. So that's the B part. So A, B. And C has to be convenience. Very often, what happens is when we come out
Sorry, Ashutosh, we lost your audio.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now, Ashutosh. Yes.
We can hear you now.
Am I audible now? Sorry.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I'm back. So sorry for that technical glitch. So I talked about affordability and accessibility. I said then beneficial. So because it has to be beneficial to the issues that they're facing. The third part is convenience. Many times we come with technology, we come with solutions which is from our perspective. We have to look at convenience of the individual MSME. It has to be something which is very attuned to the way they do business. It has to be as simple as possible. It has to be as frictionless as possible. And the last part, which is D, is dependable, which is all about, if you're talking about, if you're talking about, going digital, or, you're going to always have this concern, is my data, or is my data safe? Is my money safe? Is the transaction going to remain safe? So that's the way I would look at it. A, B, C, D. Affordability, accessibility, benefits, convenience, and dependability.
That's a very nice acronym. Easy to remember. ABCD.
Yeah. You should trademark it.
You should trademark it, Ashutosh. Yeah. Can they hear us? Yeah, there.
Yeah, I can hear you. Could you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. I think I'm not sure if Pacita can hear us though.
Yeah.
I can hear all of you.
Okay,
I don't.
okay.
I have given up trying to make myself heard. But yes, Ashutosh, I was listening to your last piece. But I think we don't have much time. So since you've all already discussed how we will fast track everything, I think what we really need to do is, even after this event, is to connect and maybe get inspiration from Ashutosh being the wider reaching, Eugene being the philanthropist of them all, who's sharing all his ideas and all that state power of that little but powerful city state, which is Singapore. And thank you for your invitation, Eugene, both for our travel there and for the collaboration, seriously speaking. And for Jaypee, who's hyper locally beside me in this group of islands. But I think we're supposed to wrap up now, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
So I don't want to, I don't want to discount the fact that all of us have put in all our ideas to help the states or the governments, and to help all the private sector to think about transformation. And I think this has been a most educational session for me as an entrepreneur. And as an entrepreneur, I see a lot of hope for people like me, for women, for MSMEs. There are people like you guys, MasterCard, UnionBank, who's seen that silver lining in this pandemic. And of course, people like Eugene in MAS, and how far-reaching their initiatives are, not only for Singapore but for the rest of the world. So I think MSMEs definitely have, a big role to play in this digital and fintech transformation. So we thank you for all your initiatives, and I know that for entrepreneurs like me, there is a lot of hope despite the pandemic. Thank you very much, and good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.